The last vault was not underground. It wasn't hidden in some concrete compound in Eastern Europe, or buried in metadata, or encrypted behind forgotten passwords. It was a garden, at the edge of a sleepy village in northern Wales, nestled behind a crumbling stone wall and a rusted iron gate, was the final key. I found it by following a trail that had no name, just breadcrumbs, a phrase and a footnote from Marlene's early interviews, a series of coordinates embedded in the margin notes of Helix's first audit, and a watercolor painted by one of the survivors, showing a tree with silver leaves. The address didn't exist on any map, but the place did. An old cottage stood in the center of the overgrown lot, choked in ivy and wildflower. A broken bird bath leaned sideways near the door, filled with leaves. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe another archive. Maybe nothing at all. What I found was a woman, sitting beneath the silver-leafed tree, reading from a small, leather-bound book. Her hair was long and white, her eyes behind thick glasses, her dress a faded shade of lavender. "You came," she said without looking up. I froze. "You knew I would," she nodded. "Of course. You've been walking this path longer than you think." I crossed the grass and sat beside her. The book trembled slightly in her hands. "Are you Marlene?" She smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she handed me the book. It was filled with names. Handwritten, all the children, all the projects, all the handlers and doctors and defectors. It was a ledger, yes, but it read like a prayer. Each name was followed by a line in another language. One I didn't recognize. I traced a few with my fingers. "What does it say?" "Their truth," she said, as they spoke it. The first time they remembered. I swallowed hard. "Why here?" She looked around the garden. "Because healing isn't a room full of files. It's a space where memory is allowed to grow wild." I stayed for hours. We didn't talk much. Mostly I listened. To the wind through the branches, the soft creak of the tree, the breath of the woman who had once orchestrated an empire of forgetting, now reduced to a caretaker of names. When I left, she gave me a single silver leaf, pressed between glass. "For your wall," she said, "not as a trophy, as a reminder." I carried it home like it was fragile, though something in me knew it wasn't, knew it had survived too much to break now. Back in Geneva, I mounted it beside my window, beneath the candle, above a note I had written years ago that simply read, "Begin again." And so I did. Not with a new archive, not with a new story, but with a garden of my own. I bought a small house outside the city, a place with crooked floors and stubborn doors, and a backyard just wild enough to hold memory. I planted spirals in the soil, flowers arranged in the patterns once used in programming scripts. Except now, they bloomed. Children came to visit. Not survivors. Not patients. Just kids. They painted. They sang. They played beneath a wind chime made from old keys. Sometimes they asked me what I did before this. I always said, I helped people remember. And when they asked what I do now, I helped them grow. Juliet visited with her partner and brought jars of honey labeled in 4 languages. Zara came once a month, always with something new from the field. Map fragments, whispers of new vaults, sightings of old symbols in new places. I archived everything, but I stopped chasing, because the point was never to finish. It was to keep beginning. One evening I received a message. No sender, no subject line, just an image. A group of women standing around a fire holding hands. In the background, a mural painted on stone. My face, surrounded by spirals with one word beneath. Remembrance. I wept. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming ache of knowing that somewhere people were remembering because I remembered. Because I told the truth when it would have been easier to disappear. Because I stayed. So here now, as I write the last page of this journey, I don't feel an ending. I feel a horizon, a place we walk toward together. My name is Callista Hargrove. I survived forgetting, I reclaimed memory, and I gave it back to the world. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. subscribe, and turn on notifications. My first night alone in that house was a strange collision of two lives. The one I had just lost and the one I hadn't yet stepped into. I couldn't sleep. I just sat by the window in my red blouse, mascara smudged, staring at the streetlights flickering through the drizzle. My phone kept vibrating. Messages from friends. Missed calls from Mason. News alerts. Emails. Everyone suddenly wanted something from me. And I wanted nothing from anyone. The inheritance hadn't sunk in yet. How could it? One moment I was calculating how to stretch a few dollars across rent and groceries, and the next I was the heiress to a global fortune. That kind of shift doesn't hit you all at once. It rolls in waves. It wasn't real. Not yet. But the betrayal? That was real. That had weight. I found myself obsessing over details. The day he took the money. The gas receipts I'd once seen in the car. The lipstick on a shirt he'd blamed on a coworker's hug. I remembered how he stopped holding my hand in public. How he stopped asking about my day. I rewound every scene in my memory, looking for clues I'd missed. There were plenty. The next morning I woke up to rain. Heavy, cold rain that turned the world gray. I took a long shower and stood under the hot water until my skin felt raw. And then, without knowing why, I packed a bag. Not a lot. Just what mattered. A few books. A photo of my mom. My old journals. And then, I drove to the airport, with no plan, no destination. It turns out, when you're newly wealthy and extremely angry, doors open fast. I booked a last-minute first-class ticket to London. It was where Dr. Whitmore had lived for decades. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I needed to feel her world. To see the life she left behind for me. Maybe I needed it to feel less like theft and more like fate. The jet lag didn't bother me. My body was too wired for sleep. London was wet, gray, buzzing. I rented a flat in Kensington. Nothing extravagant. Modern, minimal, with huge windows and a little terrace. I bought black coffee and walked for hours through the rain-soaked streets, letting the city soak into me. That's when I began piecing together Dr. Whitmore's life. She wasn't just wealthy. She had been brilliant. A neuroscientist, author, investor. Her townhome was like a museum, filled with rare books, abstract paintings, handwritten letters and glass frames. She had been kind, curious, passionate, and lonely. She'd never married, never had children. But in one dusty box tucked in the corner of her library, I found dozens of letters, written to me, to Cheer Callista. Even if you never read this, I want you to know I chose you for a reason. Some were philosophical, others casual. A few read like journal entries. She spoke about her regrets, her hopes, her fears. She spoke about my mother, how they'd fought, how she wished things had been different. And in the very last letter, sealed in gold wax, she wrote, "Money is power, Callista, but it's also a mirror. It will show you who you are, and it will show others too. Be careful, but don't be afraid." That line stayed with me. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat in her study and let the quiet soak in. And when I finally stood, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to rise. The first step? Closing the chapter with Mason, I flew back to Seattle 2 weeks later. My hair was different. My wardrobe had changed. But what struck me most wasn't the exterior. It was the energy. I felt armored, like I'd finally stepped into the skin I was supposed to have all along. He was waiting at my apartment. Of course he was. He stood when I walked in, that same sheepish look I used to fall for. "Callista," he said, his voice thick with shame. "Please, just let me explain." I said nothing, just watched him. He looked tired, older, nervous. "I made a mistake," he started. "I didn't know how to tell you. Things weren't right between us, and I panicked. She was a mistake. You drained our accounts, Mason." "I know, I thought you'd be fine." I was going to send money back. I swear, I just needed time to think. And then when I saw your name in the news, I held up my hand. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to finish. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. I'm filing for divorce, I said. My lawyers will be in touch. Don't contact me again. His mouth opened, closed. He stepped toward me. Callista, please. Don't do this. We can fix it. I love you. I looked at him for a long time. No, I said quietly. You don't. And I walked away. The next months were a blur of transformation. I didn't waste time flaunting wealth. I used it to build. I hired a financial advisor, a therapist, a private security consultant. I started donating anonymously to women's shelters. I bought a small media firm on the brink of collapse and began rebuilding it, focused on telling stories like mine. Stories of betrayal, of recovery, of quiet power. And people noticed. One article turned into 2. Then came interviews, speaking engagements. I was no longer just the heiress who got dumped. I was becoming a symbol. Not that I asked for it, I just told the truth. And women, they showed up. From everywhere. One night after a panel in New York, a young woman approached me. She looked maybe 22. Her eyes were red from crying. I left him, she whispered. Because of you. And that was when I realized something. Mason hadn't broken me. He'd awakened me. But the story wasn't over, because someone was watching. I noticed him first in Paris, then again in Rome. A man in a gray coat, always on the edge of the crowd. Never too close, never too far. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then came the letters, slipped under hotel doors. No return address, no signature. Just one line. You have no idea what she left you. The airplane cabin was dim, the windows tinted to a dusky blue that blurred out the world below. I sat in seat 2A, a glass of untouched champagne in front of me, trying to breathe through the sensation that everything familiar had been stripped away. This wasn't a vacation. This wasn't a business trip. This was an escape. No, a rebirth. And it didn't come with a neat itinerary. The flight attendant leaned down to whisper, "Would you like to see our dinner options, Ms. Hargrove?" Ms. Hargrove. It sounded like a stranger's name. I almost didn't answer. "No, thank you," I murmured. I stared at the clouds as if they might part and reveal some sign, some symbol that would tell me I was doing the right thing. But there was only silence. And for once, that silence didn't suffocate me. When we landed, it was late afternoon in Florence. I hadn't chosen the city with logic. I'd spun a globe and jabbed my finger down like a child playing fate. And it landed on Italy. Romantic, chaotic, sun-drenched Italy. Seemed fitting. I checked into a boutique hotel with cracked marble floors and a sleepy calico cat in the lobby. My room had a wrought iron balcony that overlooked a narrow cobblestone alley and terracotta rooftops. For 3 days, I didn't answer calls. I didn't check my email. I didn't post a thing. Instead, I wandered. I visited museums without reading the placards. I watched artists sketch by the riverbanks and old men argue over chess in the piazza. I bought fresh bread and pecorino from the market and ate on benches under the sun. It was the first time I'd felt anonymous in a long time. But anonymity doesn't erase pain. On the 4th night, I woke up gasping. The dream was vivid. Mason standing in our old kitchen, holding out his hand. Except when I reached for it, his skin turned to ash. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat at the desk and wrote, not just a diary entry, not a journal. I wrote the first line of a book. On the day my husband emptied our accounts, I didn't scream. I poured myself a glass of water and waited to feel something. The words poured out of me like water from a dam finally cracked. It wasn't about him. It was about *me. About grief, identity, silence, and fire. About what it means to be undone by love and rebuilt by purpose. For the next 2 weeks, I wrote every day, in cafes, on rooftops, at the edge of the Arno River. My laptop became my anchor, every word a stitch sewing me back together. And then came the offer. A publisher reached out. One I didn't recognize. Apparently, someone I'd met briefly at a women's empowerment panel months ago had passed my name along. They loved my voice. They wanted a memoir. The title? The Quiet Divorce. I said yes. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Mason. It was about reclaiming my story. With the advance, I didn't need the money, but I wanted the platform. I wanted the reach. I wanted other women to see what was possible after betrayal. Not just survival, evolution. The book became a sensation faster than I expected. Pre-orders exploded. Social media flooded with quotes from my draft chapters. One line in particular spread like wildfire. Sometimes the worst day of your life cracks open the sky just enough to let the light back in. I started getting invitations. Podcasts, speaking events, panels. I stayed in Florence for 5 months, long enough to feel the city settle into my bones, long enough for the staff at the hotel to start leaving espresso for me before I asked, long enough for the cat to sleep on my luggage every morning. And then, just when I thought peace had finally found me, the envelope arrived. No return address, no postage, just slipped under my door. Inside was a photograph, faded, black and white, of a woman I didn't recognize, standing in front of a wrought iron gate. Behind her was the Whitmore estate in London, on the back of the photo in handwritten ink. She wasn't the first. You aren't the last. No signature. My heart pounded. Who sent this? Was it a threat? A warning? A riddle? I contacted Jonathan Marks immediately. He was just as confused. The estate records are complete, he said. There's no mention of anything like this. But his voice held tension. I flew back to London the next morning. I needed answers. The townhouse hadn't changed. Still elegant. Still empty. I went through every drawer, every file, the attic, the cellar, even the loose floorboards. And then, hidden behind an old oil painting in the study, I found it. A lockbox. Rusted. Unmarked. Inside? Dozens of letters. Journals, photos, all of them from women. Different names. Different decades. All connected to Marlene Whitmore. Some were lovers. Some were protégés. A few were distant relatives like me. All of them had received something from her. Land. Money. Paintings. And all of them, in their letters, spoke about the same man. Mekarab Samaro. Mekarab Samaro Lesmar. A man in a gray coat. Watching. Waiting. Following them after her death. My hands trembled. Who was he? And what did he want from me? I stared at the old letters until the words blurred. The stories were fragmented, handwritten in different decades, ink faded and smudged. Some were addressed to Marlene. Some were written by her. A few were unsigned. But all had one common thread. A man. Watching. Silent. Present. And always right after an inheritance. I couldn't explain the chill crawling across my back. Maybe it was the weight of the history I hadn't known I inherited. Maybe it was the sense that I wasn't the first woman to be drawn into a legacy she hadn't chosen. Or maybe it was the undeniable sense that someone, somewhere, had already decided how this story should end. I spent hours cataloging the contents of the lockbox. I took photos, scanned each document. A pattern emerged. Each woman who'd received a gift or property from Marlene had also reported something strange. Mysterious calls, locked doors found open, books out of place, a man in a gray coat, sometimes glimpsed through windows, sometimes caught in reflections. The earliest letter dated back to 1972. The most recent? 2019. Some of the women wrote about confronting him. Others wrote of feeling hunted. But the final letter stopped me cold. It was written by a woman named Juliet, dated 5 months before Marlene passed. He came again last night. Same coat, same stare. I asked Marlene who he was, and she said he protects what matters. Don't be afraid. But I come as afraid, Callista. I think she's hiding something. I think we both are in danger. If you ever find this, please look deeper. This isn't about money. I barely slept. I called Jonathan Marks in the morning. Did Marlene ever mention a man named Gray? Or anything about a guardian, a stalker? He paused too long. Callista, I think you're under a lot of stress, he said gently. Marlene had no family save for you. There's nothing suspicious in her files. I didn't believe him. Not because he lied, but because of how carefully he avoided the truth. I needed help. Someone who could analyze these letters, dig into the archives, find connections I couldn't. But I couldn't go to the police. Not with what I had. It would sound like paranoia, conspiracy. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Zara Fielding, former classmate, once my closest friend, now a well-known investigative journalist, with a reputation for chasing down cold trails and buried truths. She picked up on the first ring. Callista? Her voice was cautious, curious. This is unexpected. I need you, I said, and not as a friend, as the best reporter I know. There was a pause. Then, talk. I told her everything. The inheritance, the photo, the lockbox, the man, the letters, every strange detail, every whisper of a pattern. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. You know this sounds insane, right? She said. But also, this is exactly the kind of insane I live for. We agreed to meet in Paris. Neutral ground. Public. Safe. Zara arrived in a whirlwind of energy and suspicion. She wore dark sunglasses and a scarf like she was stepping off a movie set. We met at a café near Montmartre. I brought a folder of copies. Everything from the lockbox. She sifted through them with growing intensity. These names, she murmured. Some of them I've seen before. A few were mentioned in archived estate cases. Weird legal anomalies, vanishing heirs, sudden asset transfers. Can you track them? She nodded. Give me 48 hours. While she worked, I stayed close. I didn't feel safe walking alone anymore. Not since I started spotting shadows where there shouldn't be shadows. A figure across the street that vanished when I blinked. The feeling of being followed in galleries, on bridges, through alleyways. And then came the next letter. It arrived in my hotel mailbox, though I hadn't told anyone where I was staying. No name, just one sentence. You're closer than you think. But closer to asterisk. What? I showed it to Zara. She didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. Instead, she grabbed her laptop and pulled up encrypted archives. Hours passed. She pieced together a digital spiderweb, connections between Marlene's properties, charitable foundations, art acquisitions, and off-record transactions. And then she found it. An offshore account tied to a shell company registered in Liechtenstein, one that had been receiving anonymous deposits for decades. The listed owner? Marlene. But also someone else. Juliet. Zara leaned back, frowning. Juliet didn't just inherit from Marlene. She was funneling money back to her, for years, like a loop. But why? I asked. Zara stared at the screen. What if the estate isn't just a gift? What if it's a job? The theory sounded wild, but the more I thought about it, the more it fit. Marlene had handpicked women. Not random heirs. Selected. Groomed. For something. Was she protecting a secret? Or were we being used to protect it for her? Zara and I returned to London the next morning. We needed to access the estate again. Properly, methodically, but something was different this time. The lockbox was gone. The painting that had concealed it? Rehung, perfectly centered. I knew I hadn't moved it. No one else had keys. Except the man in gray. That night I woke to a noise downstairs. A soft click. Then silence. I reached for my phone. No signal. I crept down the staircase, barefoot, heart thudding. The front door was ajar. A note lay on the mat. Black ink. No envelope. "Do you know who she really was?" I turned in a slow circle, scanning the dark. Empty. Zara stood behind me, holding a kitchen knife. "We need to leave," she said. "We need to stay," I replied, because for the first time, I didn't just want to escape this legacy. I wanted to understand it. Whatever Marlene was hiding, I had to know, even if it meant unraveling everything she built. Even if it meant risking the one thing I had just begun to rebuild, myself. Zara and I didn't speak for a long time after that night. She made tea like nothing had happened, but I could see the shift in her eyes. Less fire, more calculation. Something in the way she gripped the handle of the kettle like it was a weapon told me she was just as shaken as I was, though she'd never admit it. We sat at the long oak table in Marlene's kitchen, bathed in the pale gray of the London morning. Rain slid down the windows in lazy sheets. Neither of us touched our cups. "Someone was in this house," she said finally. "Yes, and not just once." I nodded. Zara stared into her tea, then looked up sharply. "This is bigger than we thought." She was right, and we both knew it. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't even about Marlene anymore. It was about whatever she'd been protecting, and why someone didn't want us to know about it. We spent the day going through the house again. We cataloged every item, every book, every drawer. We looked behind paintings, inside vents, beneath floorboards. Nothing. Whoever had taken the lockbox had done it cleanly. That night, I opened Marlene's old journals again, flipping through the brittle pages for any clue we might have missed. And then, tucked between two entries about a Paris lecture in 1994, I found something strange. A pressed flower. Not just any flower. A black rose. It was dry, delicate, perfectly preserved. Underneath it, scrawled in ink. June 18th, the last time. "What does that mean?" I murmured. Zara looked over my shoulder. Where was she on June 18th? We pulled travel records, bank statements, flight manifests. On June 18th, 1994, Marlene was in Prague. That was all we had. I booked 2 tickets. Zara didn't argue. We flew out the next morning, landing in a city that felt carved from stone and memory. Prague was eerie and beautiful, the kind of place where history breathes through every crack in the cobblestone. We traced Marlene's path using credit card charges and hotel receipts from decades ago. She'd stayed at a small inn near the old town square, still standing, still operating. The receptionist was a man in his 60s who remembered Marlene. She was quiet, he said, always watching, but kind, very kind. "Did she meet anyone here?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. One man. He came 3 nights in a row. Long gray coat, never gave a name." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Did he leave anything behind?" He disappeared for 10 minutes, then returned with an envelope, yellowed with age. It was addressed to Marlene. Never opened. I took it with shaking hands. Inside was a single slip of paper. 1 sentence. "You were never meant to carry this alone." That night, I dreamed of fire. Not metaphorical fire, real flames, licking at the edges of my vision. I stood in the middle of the Whitmore estate, watching the walls crumble. Books turned to ash. Marlene's portrait melted like wax, and in the center of it all stood the man in the gray coat, staring. When I woke, my sheets were soaked. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. We didn't talk about the dream. Instead, we went deeper. Zara uncovered a hidden property in Marlene's name, one not listed in the estate. A cabin in the Swiss Alps. Remote. Inaccessible by car during the winter. We rented a Jeep, loaded it with supplies, and drove into the snow. The road disappeared after an hour, so we walked the last 2 miles. It was freezing, silent. The kind of silence that hums in your ears. The cabin was modest. Wood and stone. A sloped roof heavy with snow. We broke the lock. Inside, everything was pristine. A fire had been lit recently. "Someone's been here," Zara said. There was no electricity, just candlelight and the crackle of logs. We found more journals. Not Marlene's. Juliet's. The pages were full of symbols, maps, names, coordinates. She'd been investigating something Marlene had left unfinished. Something called the Vault. According to the notes, the vault was real. A hidden room beneath the Whitmore estate. Built during World War II. Designed to store sensitive research, documents, and, in Juliet's words, secrets too dangerous to name. My hands trembled as I flipped the last page. It read, "The vault holds the truth, but the truth has a price." We returned to London the next day. We didn't speak during the flight. Back at the estate, we tore through the cellar, tapping every brick, every panel, until we found it. A hollow echo behind the wine rack. We removed the bottles, pulled the shelf away. Behind it was a door, metal, ancient, with a rotary dial and no keyhole. We stared at it. Zara whispered, "This is it." I turned the dial, guessing numbers from Marlene's journals. It clicked on the fourth try. The door creaked open. Inside was darkness. A spiral staircase led down into shadow. We descended. The vault was a single room, lined with filing cabinets and steel drawers. Cold, sterile, silent. We opened the first drawer. Inside were documents. Classified, redacted, yellow with age. Government files. Medical records. Letters from international agencies. And photographs. Marlene, with men in military uniforms, with scientists, with a woman in a wheelchair, eyes hollow. At the back of the room, a sealed safe. The combination was etched into the base. June 18, 94. June 18th. The last time. Inside the safe. A single flash drive. Zara plugged it into her laptop. Video files. Audio recordings. Scans of brain experiments. Testimonies from women. Project Helix. The name chilled me. It was Marlene's research. Not on neuroscience. Not officially, but on memory manipulation, identity conditioning, cognitive rewriting. Experiments performed on orphaned girls, funded by multiple governments, covered up for decades. And Marlene had been involved, at the center of it all. The heir, the scientist, the protector, and the architect of something deeply unethical. Zara looked up at me, horror in her eyes. "She left this for you," she said, "so you could decide what to do with it." I stared at the drive. All my life, I thought Marlene had saved me. But now I wasn't sure if she'd saved me or prepared me to fix what she'd broken. The choice was mine. Bury the past, or expose it, even if it cost me everything. I didn't speak for nearly an hour after we found the flash drive. Zara watched me carefully, her laptop humming softly between us as it finished backing up the contents. She didn't ask questions, not yet. She knew what I was doing, reconstructing everything I thought I understood about Marlene, about myself, about this inheritance that had become less of a gift and more of a curse. Outside the vault, the world continued as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. The project's name, Helix, echoed like a drumbeat in my head. Over and over. Project Helix. Marlene had been at the center of something global, something dangerous. She'd hidden the research, tucked it beneath legacy and wealth and well-tailored stories. Had she done it out of guilt, fear, or had she truly believed in it once? That question haunted me. Zara leaned back in the metal chair, rubbing her temples. This isn't just unethical, it's criminal. And not just decades ago. If any of this research is still active, if anyone's still running Helix, it's a threat. I stood, pacing the length of the vault. She didn't destroy it. She preserved it, curated it. She wanted someone to find it. She wanted Sana to find it. Zara gave a short nod. The question is, why now? I didn't have an answer. We left the vault before dawn. The London sky was turning pale, streaked with the soft grays of morning. Neither of us had slept. My body ached. My brain refused to slow. I sat at Marlene's desk and stared out the window. The city was waking up. Cars hummed on the distant streets. Lights flickered in flats across the block. Zara placed a cup of coffee beside me. We have options. Name them. We leak it, anonymously. Let journalists tear it apart. It'll go viral. There'll be investigations. And I lose control, I said. Or we take it to international human rights courts. That could take years, decades, and they'll bury it before then. Zara hesitated. Or we make it public ourselves. You, as the heir, as the whistleblower. I turned toward her. That puts a target on my back. She didn't blink. You already have one. The silence between us was thick, charged. And then, as if summoned by the moment, the doorbell rang. Zara and I froze. It was still early. No deliveries. No appointments. She reached for the small handgun she kept in her bag. I followed her into the foyer. She looked through the peephole and swore under her breath. It's him. I knew before she said it. The man in the gray coat. He stood on the steps, still and calm, hands in his pockets. Not threatening, not nervous. Just there. Zara looked at me. Do we let him in? I nodded. She opened the door halfway. He didn't move. Miss Hargrove, I won't come in unless you ask me to. His voice was quiet, British, educated, soft around the edges. Who are you? I asked. He bowed his head slightly. My name is Nathaniel Gray. I was Marlene Whitmore's associate. Associate? I echoed. She called me her shadow. I suppose that's more accurate. Zara raised her gun. You've been following her. He nodded again. To ensure her safety, and to ensure the vault remained undisturbed until it was time. I stepped forward. She meant for me to find it. Yes. What is Helix? I demanded. He hesitated. A mistake, one she tried to correct, but couldn't. And you? I protect what remains. Zara stepped between us. Why should we trust you? He turned his gaze to her. Because if I wanted to silence either of you, I would have done so already. That landed with a quiet, undeniable weight. I gestured toward the study. Come in, but you sit, and you answer every question. He inclined his head and stepped inside. We sat around the fireplace. Zara never lowered the gun. Nathaniel folded his hands. Project Helix began in 1962, under a different name. Post-war, several governments feared the rise of rogue ideologies, particularly in orphaned or war-affected youth. The goal was to use memory and behavioral conditioning to mold personalities. Obedient, loyal, useful. Useful? I echoed, disgusted. Yes, agents, scientists, politicians, assets. And Marlene? She was young, brilliant, recruited out of Cambridge. She believed at first it was about healing trauma. But she discovered the truth too late. And by then, she was complicit. I felt bile rise in my throat. She tried to dismantle it, he continued. When she couldn't, she began collecting evidence, preserving it, for someone she trusted to finish what she started. Me. He nodded. Yes, you were chosen early, watched from a distance. Your strength, your losses. She believed you were the one who could break the chain. I stood, heart pounding. Why didn't she do it herself? She was compromised, watched. She lived long because she stayed silent. I looked at Zara. Her jaw was tight, her finger steady on the trigger. "What now?" I asked. Nathaniel looked up. "Now you decide. Destroy the data, walk away, or expose it, and accept what comes." "What comes?" "War. Not with guns, but with narratives. Power, reputation. You will be hunted, Callista." I exhaled slowly. "I already am." He stood. "Then I will help you." Zara raised the gun higher. "Why would we trust you?" "Because I failed her. I won't fail you." I believed him. I don't know why. Maybe it was the steadiness in his voice. Maybe it was because I had nothing left to lose. I looked at Zara. "We release it." She nodded. And just like that, we started a war. Within 48 hours, we built a secure digital archive. Zara contacted trusted journalists. Nathaniel reached out to hidden allies. Academics, whistleblowers, survivors. We timed the release. A single website. A countdown clock. And when it hit 0, every document, every file, every piece of data dropped into the public domain. The world broke. Governments denied. Former agents vanished. Lawsuits erupted. Survivors came forward. And me? I sat on a rooftop in Florence again, watching the sunrise. My name was everywhere. Headlines, hashtags, news specials. Half the world called me a hero. The other half wanted me buried. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding. Because I hadn't just inherited Marlene's estate. I had inherited her fight. I watched the world erupt from a distance. In Florence, the bells of the old churches still rang every hour. Tourists still crowded the Duomo, and the scent of espresso still drifted through cobbled alleys. But my world had fractured beyond recognition. Every news cycle brought a fresh storm, names unearthed, agencies implicated, countries accused of collusion. The term helix became the most searched word on the internet within 72 hours. They called it a scandal, a cover-up. Some said it was fake. Others said it was just the tip of a monstrous iceberg. Every political talk show, every podcast, every Twitter thread dissected the footage, the documents, the testimonies. Victims emerged, older now, fractured but unbroken. Brave souls who'd spent decades doubting their own memories. I received thousands of messages, emails, handwritten letters. A few death threats, but far more came from women. Women like me. Some whose husbands had erased them, some who had survived systems that tried to control them, some who had just needed someone to say, "You're not crazy. You're not alone." I didn't answer them all, but I read every single one. Zara stayed in London. She was building something. An investigative hub, she called it. A place for whistleblowers, journalists, and digital archivists to protect stories like ours. We named it the Whitmore Project. And it grew faster than either of us expected. Nathaniel vanished for weeks. Then, without warning, he appeared in Florence. He looked different. Older somehow, like a man dragging shadows behind him. He handed me a sealed envelope. "I found her," he said. "Who?" "Juliet." I froze. "She's alive." She disappeared 2 years ago, went off-grid, changed her name. But she's still watching, still waiting. She knew you'd come. The letter inside was handwritten, the same sharp cursive I'd seen in her journals. Callista, asterisk. You opened the vault. You did what I couldn't. I ran. I regret it every day, but if you want answers, true answers, you'll find me in Tangier. Bring the locket. Juliet. I blinked. What locket? Nathaniel reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver locket, tarnished by time. I opened it. Inside was a black and white photo of a child. Curly hair, bright eyes. No name. And beneath it, a slip of paper folded tightly. Coordinates. I've been keeping it safe. Nathaniel said quietly. Marlene gave it to me on her last birthday. Said it belonged to the one who would finish her story. I ran my thumb over the child's face. Do you know who this is? No. But Juliet will. I didn't hesitate. I booked a flight that evening, Florence to Casablanca, then a small charter to Tangier. The air was thick and warm, perfumed with spices and ocean mist. The city pulsed with a strange rhythm, part ancient, part electric. I followed the coordinates to a worn building near the edge of the Medina. No sign, no number. Just a red door. I knocked once. Juliet answered. She was in her 60s now. Hair cropped short, face lined with time. But her eyes. Those eyes held the same defiant light I'd seen in her letters. Callista, she said. Not a question. A fact. Yes. She stepped aside. Come in. Her apartment was sparse. Books, maps, newspapers, a world built from fragments. We sat across from each other, a small table between us. You found it, she said. The vault. I did. And Helix? It's out. All of it, she exhaled, almost smiling. Then you've already done more than I ever could. I placed the locket on the table. You asked for this. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. She opened it, stared at the photo. This is her, she whispered. Who? My daughter. I sat up straight. You had a child? She nodded slowly. They took her from me. Said I was unfit. Said I was unstable. I didn't know then. But she was part of it. They wanted to raise her in Helix. From birth. My throat closed. I ran, Juliet continued. Went underground. Faked my death. I tried to find her for years. But she vanished into the system. She'd be in her 40s now. The weight of her story settled into the room. And you think she's still alive? I know she is. I've seen whispers. A name in a government contract. A photo in a classified file. She's alive. But they've buried her so deep. Juliet's voice cracked. Marlene gave you the locket. She believed you could find her. I leaned forward. Then let's find her. Juliet smiled, the first real smile I'd seen. You don't even know what you're stepping into. I do now. Over the next week we worked like ghosts. Quiet. Unseen. Juliet still had contacts. Spies turned dissidents. Archivists turned hackers. We chased the name from Morocco to Switzerland to Hong Kong. Every thread led to another. A new alias, a new dead end, a new trail, and then finally, a match. A woman named Eleanor Byrne. No digital footprint until 5 years ago. Then suddenly, a career in a private biotech firm. Rapid promotions, military consulting work. One photo, curly hair, bright eyes. Juliet clutched the image, tears falling silently. She's alive. I placed a hand over hers. And now we bring her home. But we weren't the only ones searching. 2 days later, Zara called. They found the Florence apartment, she said. It's been ransacked. They were looking for something. Did they find anything? No, but they left a message. What message? Zara hesitated. They know about Eleanor. I turned to Juliet, my heart thundering. We have to move now, I said. She nodded. And together we began planning the most dangerous step of our journey. Finding Eleanor before Helix reclaimed her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Juliet had a map on her wall with red pins marking places Eleanor had surfaced. Fleeting moments caught by data trails, blurry footage, hospital receipts, and security clearance slips. Her path zigzagged across continents. Sao Paulo, Vienna, Singapore, Vancouver. But the most recent hit, just 3 days old, was from Reykjavik, Iceland. A biometric scan on a high-security facility. Unclassified, but heavily protected. A biotech firm with rumored military ties. Eleanor had entered using Level 4 clearance. The name on the credentials, Dr. Eleanor Byrne. We knew she wouldn't be there for long. We had maybe 48 hours to intercept before she disappeared again, swallowed up by whatever machine was still running the ruins of Project Helix. Juliet and I flew out that night. Reykjavik was cold, sharp, almost otherworldly. The snow glowed under orange street lamps. Everything smelled of frost and silence. We didn't book hotels. Nathaniel had arranged a safe house. A small cabin 20 minutes from the city. Wood panels. A cast-iron stove. A landline, but no Wi-Fi. Juliet looked stronger every day. Grief still haunted her, but purpose had pulled her spine straight again. She was relentless. So was I. Zara, still in London, worked remotely, sending us encrypted updates. She'd hacked into the biotech firm's server. Their internal name was Ether Research, front-facing innocuous. In reality, a shell for a Helix continuation unit. Not experimentation, at least not directly, but testing. Behavioral forecasting, predictive modeling based on modified cognitive frameworks. Eleanor wasn't just working there. She was leading the research. My stomach dropped. She's part of it? Zara's voice buzzed through the landline. Either by choice or by design. We won't know until you reach her. We scoped the facility from a nearby ridge the next morning. Steel and glass, brutalist architecture, cameras at every corner, bioscanners, 2 gates. I can get you in, Nathaniel said. He'd arrived overnight like smoke. You shouldn't be here, I told him. He only smiled. Neither should you. Juliet and I prepared in silence. Dressed in thermal black. Compact comms. Backup drive hidden beneath my coat. The locket around my neck. We slipped into the facility under cover of snowfall, using a service tunnel Zara had flagged in blueprints. No alarms. The inside was clinical. Bright lights. Quiet hums. No voices. We moved fast. Juliet knew the path by instinct, scanning labels, codes, room numbers. We passed labs with cryogenic freezers, stacks of drives, sealed doors. Then we found her. Room 318. Through a small window we saw her, Eleanor, mid-40s, dark curls pulled into a bun, white coat, alone, reading a file. Juliet's breath caught. Her fingers touched the glass. I opened the door slowly. Eleanor looked up. Her eyes locked on mine. Then Juliet. She didn't scream, didn't flinch. Instead, she said, "It's about time." Juliet stepped forward. "You remember me?" "I always remembered you." Tears welled up in Juliet's eyes, but they rewrote the emotions, taught me that grief was weakness, that searching was wasteful. I only remembered love in pieces, like smoke. I stepped closer. "You know about Helix?" She nodded. "I am Helix now, what's left of it. But I'm not what they built me to be." She stood, stepped forward, eyes locked on Juliet. "The last 5 years, I've been feeding false data into the system, slowing it down, breaking it quietly." Juliet was trembling. "Why didn't you run?" Eleanor reached for her. "Because I knew one day you'd come, and when you did, I'd be ready." We left the facility within an hour. Nathaniel handled extraction. Zara rerouted flight paths. We burned every trace behind us. In the safe house, Eleanor sat at the fire with her mother, whispering stories from a life they never got to live. But our peace didn't last. 3 days later, Zara called. "They're coming," she said. "Not just for Eleanor, for all of us." A leak. A betrayal. Someone inside the Whitmore project had sold our names. I felt it instantly, that weight in my chest. We'd triggered a system too big, too old, too embedded to die without a fight. Eleanor looked at me that night. "We have to finish it, not just expose it, erase it." And so we began the final phase. Burn protocol. We called it that because that's what it was. Fire. Destruction. Finality. We mapped out every remaining server, every database, every Helix continuation site. And we hit them, not with weapons, but with truth. With light. With carefully orchestrated digital blackouts, whistleblower dumps, and truth bombs, no PR team could spin away. We sent thousands of documents to lawmakers, to universities, to historians. We named names. And then, the final strike. A live stream. Eleanor, standing before the world, telling the truth. Her voice calm, clear. Her mother beside her. She didn't beg, she didn't cry. She told the world what had been done to her, what had been done in their names, what was still being done under different banners. It was the most watched broadcast in modern history. Within 24 hours, the last Helix node shut down. There were arrests, protests, denials, books were banned, buildings renamed. A new archive was formed, independent, global, permanent, and we walked away, not unscarred, but unbroken. Eleanor started a foundation for memory reclamation. Juliette moved to France to grow lavender. Zara became the director of the Whitmore Project full-time. And me? I returned to that rooftop in Florence. I published my second book. It was called The Vault. The last page read, "Sometimes inheritance isn't money. Sometimes it's a question so dangerous that answering it changes the world." For the first time in months, my mornings weren't dictated by dread. No encrypted files, no emergency phone calls, no countdown clocks blinking red. Just the soft clink of ceramic against stone as I made coffee on a quiet terrace in Florence, wrapped in a cotton robe, listening to the city stretch awake. The world had shifted, but so had I. I still carried the weight of it all, the secrets, the broken systems, the haunting truths. But it no longer felt like drowning. It felt like roots, grounding me. Eleanor's broadcast hadn't just changed policy. It had fractured a cultural mirror. People started looking inward, questioning, asking who they were, who they trusted. Nations rewrote archives. Public health organizations revisited historical ethics. Museums returned questionable artifacts. Grants funded trauma healing programs worldwide. It was like we'd kicked open a door to memory itself, and the world didn't quite know what to do with the mess on the other side. Neither did I. A month after the broadcast, I was invited to speak at an international summit in The Hague. They called it the Collective Memory Assembly. Poets, scientists, activists, survivors, educators, people who had lost, remembered, and rebuilt. I wasn't sure I belonged there, but I went. The summit hall was massive. Stone pillars, golden light, stained glass panels that scattered color across the carpet. My name tag read, Callista Hargrove, memoirist, truth broker. I stood at the podium, palms sweating, heart echoing in my ribs. "My husband once emptied our accounts and left me for another woman," I began. The next morning, I inherited $452 million. And I thought that was the story. But it wasn't. That was just the doorway. I spoke for 30 minutes. About truth, inheritance, responsibility, about being watched, about choosing to look back, even when it burned, about how some stories don't get closure, but they can get air. After, a woman approached me, mid-60s, silver hair in a braid. "I used to work in Helix," she said, "under another name." I froze. "I fed them bad data," she said, quietly, "for years. You reminded me why." She walked away without giving me her name. That night I wrote for the first time in weeks. Not a speech, not a statement, just a letter, to myself. You did not collapse. You reformed. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my notebook. The next morning, I received a call from Juliette. "There's someone you need to meet." "Where?" "Oslo." I booked the flight. When I landed, she was already waiting, coat buttoned to her throat, her smile soft but urgent. She took me to a nursing home on the outskirts of the city, a small, clean place. Quiet. Wind chimes in the trees. We entered a private room. A man sat by the window, sketching in charcoal. "This," Juliette said, "is Adam." The man turned slowly. His eyes were pale blue, almost translucent. He was frail, maybe in his 80s, but his hands were steady. He smiled. "So you're the one who found the vault. You know about it?" He nodded. "I helped build it." Juliet leaned against the wall. Adam was a systems architect, recruited for Helix in 1971. He designed the fail-safes, the codes, the physical infrastructure. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Adam set down his sketchpad. "Because I kept a second key." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass locket. Not like the one I carried. Simpler, older. Inside was a microchip. "This contains the true archive," he said. "Unredacted, unedited, everything Marlene couldn't save in the primary vault." My heart stuttered. "Why didn't you destroy it?" I asked. He met my eyes. "Because destruction is easy. Context is hard. The world needs both." We flew to Geneva the next day. The Whitmore Project had just opened their first secure physical archive there. Glass walls, underground vaults, climate-controlled. Zara met us at the gate. Her expression darkened when she saw the chip. "If we release this," she began. "We won't," I interrupted. "Not now. Not yet. We'll catalog it, preserve it, but let the world breathe first." Juliet exhaled, relieved. That night we toasted with cheap champagne and plastic cups. "To the ones who watched," I said. "To the ones who broke ranks. To the ones who left the door open just wide enough." Zara raised her glass. "To the ones who didn't forget." We clinked plastic. Eleanor called me later that week. She was in Nairobi, launching a trauma research coalition. Her voice sounded lighter, happier, like someone who had found a future she didn't know she was allowed to dream of. "I've been painting again," she said. "Did you know I used to paint?" "No," I said. "Juliet didn't either." She laughed. "I think I'm finally remembering who I was meant to be." I closed my eyes. Me too. 2 weeks later, I returned to Seattle. The city looked the same, but I didn't. My old condo was gone. Sold. I walked past it anyway. The new owners had painted the door. I left a note in their mailbox. "May this home give you peace." Then I went to the bookstore, the one with the journal still in the window. I bought a new one. This time, the first page didn't begin with loss. It began with legacy. I wrote, "Not all inheritances are left in vaults. Some are left in people." I was ready to live again. Not as the woman who was abandoned, not as the heiress, not as the vault keeper, but as myself. Callista Hargrove, witness, survivor, builder, and finally, whole. I didn't expect to cry the day I stood at my mother's grave. It wasn't the first time I'd visited, but it was the first time I felt like I had something worth saying. For years I'd stood at that stone with a heart full of confusion, half-spoken apologies, and the echo of things we never said to each other. But now I stood as a woman who had walked through fire. I brought a single white rose and placed it gently on the stone. My fingers traced her name. Nora Hargrove, beloved daughter, mother, dreamer. "I understand now," I whispered, "why you kept certain things from me, why you lived so tightly wound. You were protecting something, maybe even me." I didn't stay long. Grief, even the healed kind, is a private language. I flew to New York that evening for a book signing. The publisher had arranged a quiet venue, an old library with a high, vaulted ceiling and windows that turned golden during sunset. People lined up for hours. Some brought books. Others brought stories. One woman handed me a photograph of her sister, a victim of a forgotten trial related to Helix's earliest days. "She always thought she was crazy," the woman said. "Until your book." "She wasn't. Thank you." A man in his 70s handed me a sealed envelope. "She watched your broadcast," he said. "She never thought she'd live to see someone name the truth." "Who?" I asked. "My wife," he said. "She passed last week, but she made me promise I'd come." I signed his copy with trembling hands. That night, I walked alone through Central Park, coat collar pulled high, hands deep in my pockets. The city was loud but forgiving. When I returned to my hotel room, there was a small package waiting for me. No return address. Inside, a thumb drive and a single line written on an index card. Asterisk. One final file. She trusted you to know what to do with it. I didn't plug it in immediately. I sat with it. Stared at it. Something about the weight of it felt different. Eventually, I inserted it into a secure laptop Zara had given me months earlier. The file was labeled reconstruction_log_M, Whitmore_01. It was a video. Marlene Whitmore, seated in the same study where I had found her first letter, looking older, wearier, but still composed. She looked directly at the camera. If you're watching this, I'm already gone, which means you found the vault. Which means you found the others. Juliet, Eleanor, maybe even Adam. That's good. That's what I wanted. She paused, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. But I wasn't entirely honest in the archives. I couldn't be. There were things I needed hidden, not for your protection, for theirs. She reached down, retrieved a folder, and placed it before her. This, she said, is the list. A pause. The children who were never entered into the official Helix database. Hidden within black programs, used in secondary trials. Off the record, untouched by even the internal auditors. She leaned forward. There were 183 of them. Only 27 made it past phase 2. I couldn't breathe. I hid them, their files, their identities. I paid off agents, buried records, relocated families. You have the power to protect them now. But know this, if you choose to reveal them, you'll be opening a door no one can close again. The screen went black. I stared at the folder she had shown. It was a digital scan, locked, encrypted with biometric access. Only I could open it now. I called Zara. She answered on the first ring. You got something, didn't you? Yes, I said. It's more. A lot more. We agreed to meet in Berlin, where the Whitmore Project had opened a satellite center just weeks earlier. A converted Cold War bunker beneath a former art gallery. Secure, discreet. We decrypted the file together. Inside were scanned documents, photos, interviews, coordinates, children's names, their new identities. Many had no idea who they truly were. Eleanor joined us on a video call. She was pale, silent for a long time. These are survivors, she said. Some of them might be parents now. Teachers, artists, soldiers. They deserve peace. Zara stared at the screen. Or, they deserve truth. I knew we'd reached another crossroads. Revealing them could destroy lives. But staying silent could let shadows breed again. We debated for hours. Finally, we compromised. We created a private database, one accessible only through identity verification. We reached out carefully, one by one. Letters, in-person visits, gentle reveals. We offered them the chance to choose their stories. Some wanted anonymity. Others wanted to speak. One woman, living in rural Canada, asked only for a single line to be added to the archive. I wasn't broken, just hidden. In the months that followed, I traveled more than I ever thought possible. I visited villages in Nepal, met an architect in Madrid who showed me the building he dreamed of during Helix conditioning, a dancer in Cape Town who remembered songs she thought were imagined. I cried with them, laughed with them, sat in silence with them, and in each of their stories I found a piece of myself. Not the woman I was when Mason left, not the woman I was when the inheritance came, but the woman I had become. A mirror, a witness, a torchbearer. The one Marlene had somehow seen long before I ever did. One night, while flying over the Atlantic, I pulled out my notebook. I wrote, "Some inheritances are messy, heavy, sharp around the edges. They arrive disguised as betrayal, or coincidence, or silence. But when opened, they become maps. And sometimes, they lead us home. The world didn't stop after the archive. If anything, it became louder. More countries launched formal investigations. Institutions collapsed under the weight of their hidden histories. Protesters took to the streets in London, Buenos Aires, Seoul. Graffiti bloomed like resistance across walls once gray with silence. Truth can't be redacted. Meanwhile, the Whitmore Project received more testimonies than we could process. Zara expanded the team. Eleanor trained counselors. Juliet, my fierce, fire-hearted Juliet, began coordinating with mental health coalitions across Europe, lobbying for trauma recovery to be recognized as a global emergency. And me? I returned to writing, not because I needed to, but because I had to. My next manuscript was something different. Not a memoir, not a history. It was a collection of short narratives based on the anonymous stories of the survivors we'd reached. I changed names, masked locations, rearranged events, but the emotion, the scars, the reclamation, they remained untouched. It was called The Echo Map. By the time it launched, I had already started receiving invitations from universities to speak, not just about Helix, but about narrative integrity, survivor-led storytelling, and ethical authorship. At one lecture in Amsterdam, a student raised her hand and asked, "Do you believe healing is possible without revenge?" I paused, then said yes, but only if the truth is louder than the pain. The room fell quiet. After the lecture, she slipped me a note. It read, "My father was a Helix doctor. Thank you for seeing the ones left behind." I kept the note folded in my wallet. Weeks passed. Then months. And slowly, as spring unfurled across the cities I visited, something inside me softened. I began noticing the things I had once forgotten to see, the symmetry in a stranger's laughter, the way a baby's cry made old women glance up in unison, the silence between verses in a song. I began letting people back in. A friendship with a woman named Leah turned into nightly dinners in Barcelona. She was a sculptor, lost a brother to a mental break after years in a covert lab he never spoke about. She sculpted with metal, sharp, twisted shapes that somehow always caught the light just right. "We can't smooth over pain," she told me once, "but we can bend it until it points somewhere new." She gave me a piece before I left, a folded steel feather welded at the stem. "You don't have to carry everything as a blade," she said. "Sometimes it can be a wing." I wept when she hugged me goodbye. On the 1-year anniversary of Eleanor's broadcast, we held a global vigil. Not a protest, not a performance, just light. Candles lit across continents. Virtual lanterns. Bells rung in unison at the top of each hour. We called it the unburying. I spoke for less than 2 minutes. All we ever wanted, I said, was not to be forgotten. When I stepped off the stage, someone passed me an envelope. Another anonymous message. Inside was a single Polaroid. Black and white. Slightly grainy. A child, standing barefoot in a hallway lined with mirrors. And on the back, scribbled in ink. Not all vaults are underground. The writing wasn't familiar. I sent it to Zara. She ran it through databases. No match. But then she called, voice low and steady. "There's more, Callista, this isn't over." "What do you mean?" "There's a second archive, not part of Helix, not tied to Marlene." "Then who?" "It predates Helix." That stunned me, Zara continued. Juliet found references in old legal briefs. A covert initiative run through orphan care systems after World War I. It was called Project Meridian. I leaned back, spine cold. How much overlap? Enough that the names start repeating. It's like Helix was built on top of Meridian. I felt like the floor dropped beneath me. We thought we'd found the root, the origin, but it was only the trunk. Meridian had been the seed. That night I called Eleanor. She didn't answer. Instead, she sent a voice message. "I knew," she said. "I found references during my work in Geneva. I didn't tell anyone because I couldn't face the scale. But if it's true, then we're not just repairing history. We're rewriting it." The Whitmore Project convened an emergency summit. All members. No press, no live streams. We met in Dublin. A neutral ground. Rain hammered the windows as we spread newly uncovered documents across a long oak table. Photos, letters, memos written on fading onion skin, and one blueprint. A building, hidden beneath a decommissioned naval site in Brittany, France. Codename, Vault Zero. Zara looked up. If it's real, it could explain everything. Why Marlene was chosen. Why Eleanor was erased. Why we were all connected. Juliet closed her eyes. Then we need to see it. I nodded. I didn't feel fear. Not this time. I felt clarity. We'd spent a year opening wounds. Now it was time to unearth the bones. Vault Zero waited. And this time, we would be the ones holding the flashlight. We flew into Brittany under heavy cloud cover. A storm was settling in as the car twisted along narrow roads flanked by cliffs and bramble. The sea churned in the distance, violent and gray, like it knew what we were about to unearth. Zara sat beside me, scanning blueprints on her tablet. Juliet, quiet as ever, stared out the window, knuckles white around the armrest. Eleanor rode in the back, her breath even, face unreadable. Vault Zero. The name hadn't stopped echoing in my head since Dublin. Every whisper we uncovered, every line of redacted text, every blurred photograph had led to this site. A decommissioned naval research base turned silent, its history scrubbed clean. We parked half a mile out, hiking the rest on foot through thick fog and spitting rain. The entrance was, as we'd been told, a rusted steel gate chained shut beneath a crumbling arch marked in Latin. Veritas clavis requiem. Truth is the key to rest. Nathaniel met us there. He wore his signature gray coat, now damp with mist. He nodded at each of us, then pulled out a key. Only one of these was ever made. The gate creaked open like a wounded animal. Inside, we found stairs descending into shadow. Zara switched on her headlamp. Eleanor pulled out her tablet. I followed. The air changed. Damp, metallic, ancient. We passed rooms filled with rusted desks, broken monitors, empty file cabinets. But beneath the dust, there was something deliberate, like the chaos had been arranged, and then we reached it. A door unlike the rest. Reinforced steel. A keypad with symbols. Not letters, not numbers. Just shapes. Juliet stared at it, then stepped forward. She placed her hand on the metal. Her dreams, she whispered. What? I asked. Eleanor, as a child. She drew this pattern. I remember. It haunted her. Eleanor stepped forward. Looked at the keypad. Her fingers moved instinctively, pressing 4 shapes in sequence. Click. The door unlocked. Inside was a room larger than expected. Circular. High ceilings. White tiles that had faded to yellow. At the center, a glass cylinder rising from the floor. Inside it, rows of canisters, each labeled with etched brass tags. What is this? Zara asked. Juliet was already reading the names. These weren't just storage units. They were memory capsules. Literal records of tests, sessions, neural feedback loops from children once enrolled in Meridian, the precursor to Helix. Names matched survivors we knew. But others. They predate everything, Eleanor said. This is before even Marlene's time, before Geneva, before Prague. I turned to Nathaniel. Did you know this was here? He nodded slowly. I suspected. Marlene hinted at it once. Called it the scar beneath the scar. A terminal blinked to life beside the cylinder. Eleanor typed. A prompt appeared. Access requires dual consent. Without hesitation, she placed her hand on the scanner, then looked at me. I'm not the only heir, she said. You are too. My breath caught, but I placed my hand beside hers. The cylinder hissed, and the files opened. Not just Meridian, not just Helix, but a lineage of programs. Names changed, rebranded, Evolved, Project Eon, Atlas, the Regimen, Clay. Each with ties to governments, private industries, pharmaceuticals. Testing emotion suppression, language restructuring, familial memory interference. Some had been dissolved, others still listed as active. And suddenly, I understood. Helix hadn't been an origin, it was just a spotlight on one room of a house with 100 hidden doors. Zara's hands trembled. "We can't contain this!" Juliet stepped back. "We were never meant to. This was always going to be bigger." Nathaniel pulled something from his coat. "Another drive." "Zara," he said, "you need to build a second archive. One that's decentralized, immune to corruption. This data can't sit in one place." She nodded, silent, but already typing. "We took what we could. Backups, images, logs. But the physical vault stayed untouched. No one could know we'd been here." Not yet. Back on the surface, the sun was rising over the sea, a strange gold slicing through gray. We stood in a line, faces wind-burned, minds stretched thin. Eleanor turned to me. "This isn't about one woman's inheritance anymore." "I know. It's about rewriting the idea of inheritance itself." And she was right. We had uncovered not just a system, not just a crime, but a philosophy. A generational experiment in erasing lineage and replacing it with utility. And now, with the light rising behind us, we knew the war wasn't over. But we finally understood its shape. And we weren't afraid of the dark anymore. We didn't speak much on the drive back to Paris. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that settles between people who've seen something ancient stir, like standing before a sleeping giant and realizing it just blinked. Vault Zero hadn't answered our questions. It had deepened them. I stared out the window as green hills passed by in a blur, dotted with crumbling stone walls and forgotten farmhouses. Juliet sat in the front seat beside Nathaniel, hands resting in her lap. Zara dozed off next to me, her tablet blinking weakly in her arm. We'd only just begun cataloging what we had extracted. The overlap between Project Meridian and Helix, the missing names, the coded directives. But the more we pieced together, the more we realized how interconnected everything was. And worse, how intentional. Marlene hadn't just buried truth. She had delayed it, like a time capsule of guilt. By the time we arrived in Paris, the rain had started again. I found comfort in it. Rain, at least, was honest. It didn't hide. It washed. It pressed gently and then all at once. The Whitmore satellite office in Paris was tucked above a former print shop in Les Marais. We entered through a side alley, then climbed 3 flights of stairs to a wide, open room of exposed beams and tall glass windows. The walls were lined with blackboards, digital projectors, and boxes of testimony transcripts. Eleanor was already there. She'd arrived from Geneva with a duffel bag, her hair damp, her face pale but focused. She hugged Juliet first, then nodded at each of us. "I think I've found the last key." She placed a folder on the table. I opened it. It was a manifesto, written in 1953, typed on onion skin paper. A signature at the bottom, Dr. Thaddeus Virel, asterisk, asterisk. Zara leaned in. "That's one of the names from the Meridian founding logs." The manifesto was chilling, a philosophical treatise wrapped in clinical detachment. Virel believed that memory was not sacred, that early childhood was malleable, that by erasing a person's origin and replacing it with guided context, one could engineer morality, loyalty, even love. It wasn't just science, it was doctrine. And the worst part? It had worked. We had the survivors to prove it. "Why now?" Juliet asked. "Why are we finding this now?" Eleanor looked up. "Because the last of them are dying. The architects. The original team. They didn't want their secrets surviving them," Zara added quietly. "Or maybe they wanted someone to find it, someone to asterisk finally judge them." We held a team meeting that night, just the 4 of us. We knew we couldn't reveal this latest wave of information all at once. Not like Helix. The world had just started to find its balance again. If we dropped Meridian's true scope now, we'd risk collapse. So we planned. A 6-month strategy. Timed leaks. Select interviews. A 3-part documentary in production with a neutral consortium. A new interactive archive. Meridian Origins. We also drafted something none of us had anticipated. A letter from us to the global health and ethics community. It wasn't just a call for transparency. It was a demand for laws to change, for consent to be redefined, for childhood data protections to be legally untouchable, globally. We released the letter under joint names: Callista Hargrove, Juliette Moreau, Eleanor Byrne, Zara Fielding, and then we waited. The backlash came fast. Of course it did. News anchors debated our motives. Politicians spun our pasts. One headline read, "Heiress turned whistleblower wants to rewrite history." I didn't correct them. Because I did. But not to erase it. To stop it from repeating. By the second month, protests resumed, this time led by young people. Teens who had grown up in foster systems that still bore the fingerprints of Meridian's ripple effects. University students with family ties to the victims. They carried signs that read, "Na AM, not a study." A girl from Ankara emailed us a recording of her grandmother, who remembered being told her name had been too hard to pronounce and was replaced with a serial number during her time in a Swedish orphanage in 1931. Another woman from Chile sent a copy of her original birth certificate, stamped over with black ink. Eleanor cried when she read it. Because we all knew now. Meridian wasn't just a European secret. It had been global. And its legacy had twisted into places no one had bothered to check. But we were checking now. 3 months into the release, we organized a symposium. We called it Inheritance and Identity, a Reckoning. It wasn't televised. It wasn't performative. Just survivors, researchers, lawmakers, and us. The room pulsed with the ache of generations. A quiet determination stitched every conversation. I gave the closing remarks. I stood at the front of the room and held up the folded steel feather Leah had given me. This, I said, was once meant to cut. But someone bent it, welded it, turned it into something that could carry air instead of break skin. We don't erase pain, we repurpose it. When I sat down, no one clapped. They stood, every person in the room. And in that moment, I felt the weight of the inheritance lift. Not vanish, but shift. Shared, borne by many. Juliette took my hand. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we're ready." By the 4th month, I could feel my body asking for stillness. Not in a desperate way, not as collapse, but as a quiet, persistent whisper. "You've done enough. Resta." I returned to the Italian countryside, not to Florence this time, but a small village nestled between olive groves and hills that looked like they'd been painted centuries ago and just forgotten. I rented a stone cottage with a clay roof and windows that bloomed with ivy. There was no Wi-Fi, no signal. Just birds and wind and the occasional goat bleating from a distant hill. I didn't tell anyone where I went. Except Zara. She only said, "Good. Finally." I brought 2 things with me. My journals and the original letter Marlene wrote to me. The very first one, hidden inside the drawer of her desk in the London townhouse. I read it again. You'll hate me at first. Maybe longer. But when you're done hating, look again. Look deeper. I didn't choose you because you were angry. I chose you because your anger had aim. She was right. For months I had directed my fury outward. At Helix. At Meridian. At governments. At lies. But now, here, under this sun, I felt what she must have known would come next. The slow, sacred arrival of grief. Not the grief of loss. The grief of clarity. I wrote for hours every day. Longhand. No outlines. No intentions. Just memory. I wrote about my childhood. My mother's quiet hum when folding laundry. The way Mason used to trace patterns on my back before he turned cold. The first time I saw my name in a newspaper. The moment I realized I could never go back to being anonymous. One morning, while walking to the small market in town, I passed a church. Its bell tower stood crooked, and the roof sagged, but the door was open. I stepped inside. It was empty, just wood and stone and dust. And silence. I sat in a pew near the back and closed my eyes. And I thought, if memory can be shaped, then maybe forgiveness can too. Not for the architects, not for the monsters, but for myself. For the younger me who stayed in a marriage she didn't recognize. For the version of Callista who thought strength meant being silent. I forgave her. And when I opened my eyes, I felt something shift. Later that week, I received a letter in the village post. No name, no stamp. Just a slip of paper inside a blue envelope. It read, Callista. There's one more name. Coordinates were listed below. I almost threw it away. I'd done enough. I didn't want to chase anymore. But something in me, the fire that had cooled but never gone out, rose again. I called Zara. She didn't try to talk me out of it. I'll meet you there, she said. The coordinates led to the coast of Portugal. A shuttered convent, now privately owned, marked as historical property but rarely visited. We arrived at dusk. The air smelled of salt and stone. The building loomed tall and weathered, its red roof broken in places, vines crawling up the bell tower. We slipped through a side entrance. Inside, the hallways were cool and dim, lined with rotting wood and cracked tile mosaics. We didn't know what we were looking for. Until we heard it. A voice. Soft. Raspy. Humming. We followed it down a corridor into a sunlit chamber with tall arched windows. A woman sat in a wheelchair, facing the sea. Her hair was silver, her hands delicate, folded neatly in her lap. Dr. Juliet appeared behind us, breathless. The woman turned slowly and smiled. I was wondering when you'd come. Her name was Alma Reyes. She had once been a lead psychologist in Meridian's earliest trials, before she vanished in 1962, assumed dead. Mentioned only once in redacted notes. Now here she was, old, alive, waiting. We sat with her for hours. She told us stories we hadn't heard, names we hadn't uncovered. She spoke of the years she spent inside the programs, and the moment she realized she could no longer stay. They weren't helping children, she said. They were extracting them, like mining a soul. Why didn't you stop it? I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. I tried. I failed, so I erased myself instead. She handed me a leather-bound book. My ledger, my memories, the unedited ones, everything I witnessed. I held it in my lap and felt its weight settle against my thighs. She reached for my hand. You're not here to end the story, she said. You're here to decide who tells it next. That night, after we helped her into bed, I stepped out onto the cliffs alone. The wind was wild, stars endless. I opened the ledger, and I read. I didn't sleep. Neither did Zara. We took turns. Reading, recording, transcribing. Alma drifted in and out of dreams, sometimes calling out names, sometimes humming old lullabies from a world we never knew. When the sun rose, she was gone. Peaceful, eyes closed, a faint smile still on her lips. I kissed her forehead. Thank you, I whispered. We buried her in the convent garden. Simple. Quiet, beneath a fig tree just beginning to fruit. Zara placed a feather beside the stone, and I began writing again, not to expose, but to preserve. The story had more to give, and I had more to carry. It took us a week to leave the convent, not because we had to, but because none of us could. There was something sacred in the way the sea beat against those cliffs, something honest in the way the wind never stopped, no matter how silent the garden was. It felt like Alma's presence hadn't left, but had simply dissolved into the air around us, folded into the scent of fig and salt. The ledger was dense, each page layered with emotion and clarity. Alma hadn't just documented facts. She had recorded intention. emotion, the why behind every act. She wrote of Meridian's founding, yes, but more than that, she captured its culture. The way ethics meetings were masked as philosophical salons, how words like optimization, purification became euphemisms for manipulation, separation, reprogramming. She wrote of children, of their laughter in the early days, of how slowly it dimmed, how the first thing they forgot wasn't their names, it was the sound of their own joy. And then, halfway through the ledger, a new name appeared, Callista. I froze. Zara leaned over my shoulder. Is that? Yes. The entry was brief. A note from Alma's final days within Meridian, before her disappearance. She had heard of a birth. A child placed in a separate program spun off from Meridian's core facility. The note mentioned an adoption. But more importantly, it mentioned Nora Hargrove. My mother. I thought I was just chosen, I said aloud, because I was strong. Because Marlene trusted me. Zara didn't speak. She didn't have to. Alma's final confession was clear. I had been part of it all along. Not as a victim. Not as an outsider. But as one of the forgotten threads. A child once watched. Considered. Nearly claimed by Meridian's second branch. But hidden by a mother who must have known something. I stumbled outside. Ledger clutched in my hands. The fig tree bent under its own weight. The sun hadn't yet broken through the clouds. I sat on the damp stone and stared at the sea. Was this what Marlene meant? That I was aimed? Had my mother been protecting me from an inheritance I was destined to uncover anyway? I thought of the quiet in her voice, the layers of caution in her parenting, the way she had never explained why she moved us across states so often, why she kept no photos before I turned 5. She had known. And maybe, in her own terrified, gentle way, she'd tried to rewrite my path before Meridian could. I felt no anger, only understanding and sorrow. When I returned inside, Zara was organizing the pages. She looked up. You okay? I nodded. I'm not lost, just rearranged. That night, I wrote the first chapter of a new book. I didn't know the title yet, but I knew the opening line. I inherited the ashes of an empire built on silence, and from them, I learned how to speak. We flew back to Geneva 2 days later. The archive there had expanded. Now 3 floors, multiple security layers, and a team of full-time curators, trauma historians, and digital translators. Juliet had set up a program for story guardians, people trained not just to collect testimony, but to hold it with reverence. Truth, she said, deserves more than being reported. It deserves to be held. Asterisk. Eleanor was already there when we arrived, reviewing footage from a recent recovery mission in Seoul. She smiled when she saw us, but her eyes were tired. They're burying it again, she said quietly. In different ways. Legal jargon, legislative delays, political distractions. I placed Alma's ledger on the table. Then we dig louder. We digitized the pages that week, page by page, word by word. Alma's voice carried into every room. Sometimes I read aloud just to hear her. And then in one entry toward the end, we found something new. A name. The Oath Archive. Not Meridian. Not Helix. Something else. Older. We traced it to a monastery in Austria, mentioned once in a letter between doctors in the 1920s, referred to as the Last Ledger, a place where early psychological experiments on memory were documented not for science, but for penance. Penance? Zara repeated. Eleanor nodded slowly. The oath was created by defectors, people who left the first wave of memory conditioning work and tried to redeem what they'd done. The monastery had burned in 1943, but not before some of the archive was moved. No one knew where, until we got the call. An antiquities librarian in Salzburg. He had found a box misfiled under early 20th century theology. Inside were pages that didn't belong, coded diagrams, annotations, hand-signed logs. We flew out that night, and when we arrived, he was waiting with tea, gloves, and a single statement. "You're not the first to come looking." We followed him to the back of the archives, through sliding shelves and metal corridors until we reached a room sealed by a keypad and fingerprint scanner. "It's yours now," he said. "Someone left your name in the access registry months ago. Callista Hargrove." I looked at Zara. My hands shook. Inside were 6 boxes, unmarked, just wood and dust. We opened the first one. Inside, more letters, testimonies, pages of apology written by the early developers of cognitive rewriting, most of them never published, never seen. The first line I read was this: "We thought we were helping. We forgot that intention is not absolution." Zara sat down on the floor beside me. "This isn't just history, it's confession." And I understood what we were holding. The unspoken heart of it all. Not just what they had done, but what they had regretted doing. We spent the next 4 days locked in that room, reading, cataloging, recording. When we left, I felt the weight of generations settle on my spine. But I also felt ready, because inheritance doesn't end when the vault is found. Sometimes it only truly begins when the vault is opened again by someone else, someone willing to forgive, to remember, and to rebuild. I was no longer searching for answers. I was becoming the keeper of them, and I wouldn't let them be buried again. It started with a knock on the door in Salzburg. We were still in the monastery's archive, going through the 6th box, half a day behind schedule, when a quiet knock echoed against the ancient stone. The librarian, Herr Brenner, opened it with hesitation. A young woman stood outside, wrapped in a deep green coat, her hands bare despite the cold. "I was told I'd find her here," she said. Herr Brenner turned to me. "She's asking for you." I stood slowly. "Who are you?" "My name's Kira." Her accent was clean. British. But behind her eyes was something fractured. "I think I'm one of them." Zara rose too. "One of who?" Kira looked around the room. The papers, the fading ink, the gilt pressed into centuries of parchment. "One of the Oath Children." I felt my breath catch. We invited her in. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she walked slowly along the shelf, running her fingers along the spines of journals she couldn't read. "My mother never told me," she began. Not in words. But she'd hum sometimes, a tune that made no sense to anyone else. "When I was 7, I started painting spirals. Not in school. Not at home. Just in dreams." She pulled something from her coat. A postcard-sized oil painting. It was rough, but vivid. A child's eye rendered in bruised blue and streaked gold, surrounded by hundreds of tiny symbols. Each one matched the ones etched into the pages we'd just read. Eleanor joined us later that night via video call. Kira held up her drawing to the screen. "I've seen those," Eleanor whispered, "on the walls in Facility 8, but only during blackout cycles." Facility 8, one of the deepest, most hidden subprograms we had unearthed from Helix's backend. So hidden, we thought it might have been a decoy. Now it wasn't. We ran Kira's DNA through our restricted identity bank. It pinged. She was registered as K23BY76. That alone confirmed it. She had been catalogued, studied, erased, and then reintegrated into society under a false life path. We found the intervention file that had changed her trajectory. It was marked not by a name, but by a single letter. Fawn, maid, Ord, maid, aid, Fawn, Marlene, I whispered. Zara shook her head. She must have diverted some children, hidden them in plain sight. It was her penance. Kira sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. "I'm not angry," she said. I want to know who I was supposed to be. I knelt beside her. You're already more than what they intended. We added her testimony to the archive. She asked not to be anonymized. She wanted her name remembered. Later that week, 3 more people reached out. All survivors. All with fragments of memory that matched the Meridian Oath transition. One had journal entries passed down through family that they'd always dismissed as fiction. Another carried a birthmark in the shape of an 8-pointed star, a marker we now knew was part of the Oath classification system. The third brought music, a song, a lullaby in a language no country claimed. When played aloud, Alma's final pages vibrated slightly, as if the ink recognized the rhythm. Zara began building what she called the convergence tree, a massive, interactive digital timeline tracking the overlap between all known memory programs: Meridian, Helix, the Oath, Aeon, Regimen, Clay, and dozens of single-letter codename initiatives we were only beginning to map. Each program had a symbol, each one connected to others with faint, branching lines. At the root of it all, one word pulsed quietly: origin. Asterisk, asterisk. We didn't know what it meant yet, but we would. That spring we traveled to Norway. A tip from an anonymous source had pointed us to a cave system used during the Second World War. Deep within, etched into the walls, we found carvings matching the earliest oath diagrams. Only these were dated 1891, before Meridian, before anything. Eleanor touched the symbols and shuddered. We've been looking at this as something modern. But what if it's not? What if memory manipulation is just the evolution of something older? It made sense. Every culture has stories of erasure, of people reappearing with new names, of generations forgetting language, identity, belonging. What if Meridian was just the moment it became formal, institutional, scalable? That night, I stood outside the cave and wrote in my notebook. The deeper we dig, the older the roots. And roots, when buried long enough, begin to look like bedrock. But they're not. They're seeds, waiting to be unearthed. When we returned to Geneva, we hosted a closed session for our core team. Kira was there. So was Leah, Juliet, Zara, Eleanor. Even Nathaniel joined. We named the meeting the Compass Circle, because we didn't just want to follow where the data led. We wanted to decide where would lead it. There was no consensus. Some wanted another wave of disclosures. Others feared destabilization. Kira stood up and said something I'll never forget. We're looking for permission to tell the truth. But history never gave us that. So we have to take it. And so we did. We released the Oath Papers the following month. An anthology of confessions, carvings, names, testimony, and the reconstructed convergence tree. We didn't release them to governments. We released them to schools, to educators, to storytellers, to anyone brave enough to translate memory into action. And then I disappeared again. Not to hide, but to write. Because the next story I needed to tell wasn't about programs or archives. It was about what it means to survive them, to live in the aftermath, to choose memory when forgetting would be easier. And this time, the story would begin not with betrayal or inheritance, but with a name. My name. Callista Hargrove. Daughter, witness, remnant, and author of the story no one wanted to remember, but everyone needed to hear. I wrote the first line of the new manuscript on the back of a train ticket. It was a night train, cutting through the Swiss Alps like a whisper through old paper. The compartment was mostly empty. A couple slept across from me, huddled under a shared coat. I sat by the window, watching the lights of scattered towns flicker in the valley below. My name is Callista Hargrove, and I remember everything they wanted me to forget. The words came easily. The rest would not. Because this book wasn't just a memoir, it was a reclamation. It was for the children who still dreamed in fractured languages. For the mothers who raised kids born from rewritten pasts. For the teachers who spotted genius and trauma tangled in equal parts. For the women who'd been made to carry silence like it was a family heirloom. For me, I spent 2 weeks in transit. I wrote in cafes in Zurich, on benches in Munich, on the deck of a ferry crossing to Denmark. I dictated notes into my phone while standing in an abandoned library in Krakow, its shelves warped but still strong. Every city held a ghost. Every ghost had a name. When I returned to Geneva, the archive had changed again. New floors. New interns. A whole wing dedicated to audio testimonies now. Walls lined with headphones, each one connected to a story. Zara met me in the elevator. She was wearing the same red scarf from that first night in Paris when she'd told me, "This is bigger than we thought." Now it was even bigger than that. "They're asking for you in Brussels," she said, "and DC, and Tokyo." I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until the book is done." She didn't argue. She never did when she knew my mind was set. Juliet was in the Geneva greenhouse. Yes, there was a greenhouse now, helping with a trauma recovery curriculum that was being adapted into 6 languages. She handed me a cup of mint tea and asked, "Are you writing as a witness or as a survivor?" I thought for a moment, then said, "As a steward." She smiled. "Good. That means you're almost done." But I wasn't. Not yet. I had one more chapter to write. And I knew where it had to happen. London. Back where it began. Back to the townhouse. The red brick facade. The crooked iron gate. The tree in the yard that never bloomed right. The new owners had no idea who Marlene was. They'd bought the place at auction. I contacted them through a friend, explained who I was. They welcomed me in. "Take all the time you need," the woman said. "There's something about this house. It still feels like it's waiting for someone." I walked the halls in silence. My footsteps were lighter than I remembered. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like pages turning. I found her study. The desk was gone, but the light through the window was the same. The exact shade of gold that had once landed on her handwriting like a blessing. I sat on the floor and wrote, "This is not a story about the man who left me. This is not a story about inheritance or revenge or institutions. This is a story about remembering what the world tried to erase, about picking up pieces that were never meant to be recovered, about choosing to live a life shaped not by what was taken, but by what was reclaimed." When I finished, I closed the notebook and cried, not from pain, from relief. The manuscript, once typed, came to 311 pages. I sent it to the publisher. They wept when they read it, said it was the most personal, sweeping, precise book I'd ever written. I didn't ask for praise. I only asked for integrity. It was titled The Shape of What Survives. And when it launched, it went global. Not viral, not fast, but sacré-full. It was taught in classrooms, debated in medical ethics courses, cited in political hearings, translated into 20 languages. And then, one night, months later, I received a letter. No signature, no return address. Inside, a pressed black rose and a note. "There are still vaults you haven't opened, and not all of them are hidden underground." I read it twice, 3 times, then tucked it into the back of my journal. Zara saw it the next day. She didn't flinch. "Do you want to chase it?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not now." Because the point wasn't to chase every last secret anymore. The point was to live. To finally allow joy to sit at the same table where truth and pain had feasted for so long. So I did. I learned how to bake. I adopted a dog named Selkie. I planted wildflowers in a rented garden plot in Geneva. I sent letters to women I'd met on this journey. Some I hadn't spoken to in years, some who never responded. I wrote anyway, and I started a foundation, quietly, unbranded. Just initials, times CH Archive. A place to collect survivor narratives before they were rewritten again by time. The past will always echo, but I had learned to live in its rhythm, not its grip. My name is Callista Hargrove, and this is the life I rebuilt from the ashes of everything they tried to burn. Not flawless, but whole. The first time I met Anne, I was eating a croissant in a quiet park in Marseille. She sat beside me without a word, pulled out a notebook covered in paint, and opened to a page filled with my own handwriting. Except it wasn't mine. It was an exact copy. From page 213 of Asterisk, The Shape of What Survives. "Did you trace it?" I asked. She looked up. "No, I remembered it." I set the croissant down. She was maybe 17. Brown hair pulled into a loose braid. Her eyes were dark but not heavy. She didn't seem scared. Just certain. "I didn't know I was one of them," she said, "until I heard your interview. The part about dreams that didn't feel like dreams." I nodded slowly. "You remember things?" She opened the next page. It was filled with musical notation, chaotic at first glance. But I recognized it. The Oath Lullaby. "I used to hear this in my sleep," she said. "When I was 5, I sang it in school, and my teacher called my parents. Said I needed therapy." I exhaled slowly. "What do you want to do with it now?" She smiled. "Give it back." That night, we recorded her singing. Her voice was soft but steady, and when we played the file in the Geneva archive, the vibration returned, the same resonance Alma's ink had carried. Only now, the frequency triggered a file unlock buried deep in the digital ledger, a hidden layer. Audio-triggered encryption. Inside, final logs from the origin team, dated pre-Meridian, not files, not names, stories, written in prose. Each one titled after a human virtue: compassion, tenacity, adaptation, memory. They weren't data entries, they were letters. To the future. Someone knew, Zara said. Someone knew we'd need more than records. We'd need reflections. I read them all, every single one. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I asked for help. We reached out to every survivor still in contact with the archive. We asked them to read the stories aloud, one by one, each in their own language, in their own pace. We called it the Resonant Collection. It was released anonymously. No logos, no branding, just a series of voices echoing what had been hidden for over a century. Anaïs's story opened the collection. Her voice, bright with youth and courage, speaking words written long before she was born. Asterisk. If you find this, you are not the end of our line. You are the beginning of something better. Tell it all, even the parts that hurt. Asterisk. The impact was slow at first. A few downloads, a few academic citations. Then a school in Argentina used it to teach ethics in tech development. Then a group of filmmakers in Canada turned it into an animated short. Then a poet in Nairobi translated every entry into Swahili. And then the world noticed. Not all of it, not loudly, but enough. Enough to feel the echo returning. One day I found a message carved into the old fig tree outside the convent in Marseille. We remembered. Zara called me that evening. "Do you feel it?" "Yes," I whispered. It was happening. Not a movement. A remembering. The difference is important. Movements fade. They get absorbed, marketed, contained. Remembering. That spreads like wind. It cannot be stopped. Only carried. So we carried it. Everywhere. In lullabies. In poetry. In whispered stories told in midnight kitchens. And one day, while walking the coast in Portugal, I stopped to watch a group of children painting tiles on a school wall. One tile had a spiral, Another had a star. Another had a symbol only someone like me would recognize. I approached the teacher. "They just started drawing them," she said. "Said they dreamed them." I smiled. "What do they mean to you?" The teacher looked down. "Hope. Maybe. Or memory." I didn't need to correct her. She already understood. When I got back to Geneva, a small package waited at my door. Inside, a photograph. Me, seated at the edge of a fountain in Krakow. Behind me, blurred, but unmistakable, was a woman in a long coat. Marlene? Still alive? No, it wasn't possible. But the photo was recent. The timestamp was 2 weeks ago. On the back of the image. Not all endings are final. Some are instructions. Zara studied the photo under UV light. A faint signature appeared. Just that. I sat in silence for a long time. Not afraid. Just aware. Of the layers. Of the truth beneath the truth. Of how stories never really end. They only wait. And then one day, when the world is ready, they begin again, just like we did. We met in silence. A room lit only by a single lamp, tucked away in a private home in Ghent. The air carried the smell of old books and pine. The table was small, round, bare. Across from me sat a woman with eyes like mine. Or maybe not mine, my mother's. Her name was Delphine. She had been off the grid for more than 30 years. One of the original signatories of the oath, not as a child, but as a designer. A mind behind the veil. "You're wondering why I didn't come forward," she said. "I'm wondering why now." Delphine sipped from a chipped mug. "Because I've watched you stitch together the impossible with a gentleness I never thought would survive this kind of history." I didn't answer. The silence was enough. She continued, "We weren't evil, just arrogant. We believed we could engineer healing. But healing doesn't come from erasure. It comes from memory." I wrote down her words in my notebook. Delphine reached into her bag and pulled out a thin binder. She slid it across the table. Inside, blueprints, but not of machines or compounds, of conversations. Dozens of scripted interactions from the oath years. Trials of linguistic shifts. Words introduced to children with the purpose of replacing trauma triggers. Entire syntaxes designed to fracture memory into fragments less painful. It was deliberate, calculated, devastating. "Did it work?" I asked. "For a time," she said. "Until the children began dreaming in languages we never taught them. Until memory found its way back through metaphor, music, art. It was like trying to dam a river with lace." I ran my fingers over the pages. "How many?" "Too many." I copied every sheet, scanned each one into the CH archive that evening, flagged with a violet tag labeled Root Language Experiments. Zara read through them overnight. "We've been treating helix and meridian like the disease," she said. "But these were just symptoms. The infection began here." She was right. And now that we had names, scripts, intentions, we could begin the antidote. Not a deletion, an unraveling. We assembled a linguistic team. Neuroplasticity experts. Storytellers. Elders from cultures whose oral traditions had survived war, displacement, erasure. Together, we designed a framework. We called it echoing. The act of deliberately speaking remembered pain in its full, unaltered form, repeated, in rhythm, until it no longer controlled its speaker, but became something else. A tool, a thread, a choice. It began with pilot sessions in Lisbon, then moved to Sarajevo, Cape Town, Oakland, Hanoi. Every place where silence had once been weaponized. In each location, a new voice emerged. Not louder, but steadier. And as the echoing spread, it became clear we were witnessing not just healing, but return to selves, to roots, to meaning that had been buried, twisted, renamed. Juliet wrote to me from Morocco. They are starting to tell stories again, not the ones they were taught, the ones they remember. Asterisk. I printed her note and pinned it above my desk. Because every movement, every archive, every whisper had led to this. The truth that memory doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs room. And now we were making room. Everywhere. In June, we held the first Concord Gathering, a convening of every survivor, researcher, listener, and wanderer who had contributed to this long unraveling. We met in Florence, beneath a sky that seemed to carry every story we'd ever uncovered. No microphones, no panels. Just a circle. Just presence. Just voice. One by one, people stood and shared what they had found. Lost. Reclaimed. A woman from Senegal read a lullaby her mother had once been punished for singing. A man from Belfast passed around a photograph of his brother, lost in a program no one had known existed until the Resonant collection unearthed it. Anais recited her own poem, titled Return by Flamelight, and then they turned to me, not for a speech, but for a memory. So I shared the one that had never left me, the moment I found the first letter from Marlene. The way her words had not told me what to do, but invited me to remember who I was. That's all it ever takes. An invitation. A key. A whisper passed hand to hand until it becomes song. The gathering ended with silence. No applause. No farewells. Just breath. Shared. And then we left, scattered again across the globe, carrying pieces of each other. Like constellations finally mapped. I returned to Geneva and slept for 3 days. When I woke, I lit a candle and placed it by my window. Not in mourning, in reverence. Because I had remembered. And I was no longer alone. The last vault was not underground. It wasn't hidden in some concrete compound in Eastern Europe, or buried in metadata, or encrypted behind forgotten passwords. It was a garden. At the edge of a sleepy village in northern Wales, nestled behind a crumbling stone wall and a rusted iron gate, was the final key. I found it by following a trail that had no name. Just breadcrumbs. A phrase in a footnote from Marlene's early interviews. A series of coordinates embedded in the margin notes of Helix's first audit. And a watercolor painted by one of the survivors, showing a tree with silver leaves. The address didn't exist on any map, but the place did. An old cottage stood in the center of the overgrown lot, choked in ivy and wildflower. A broken bird bath leaned sideways near the door, filled with leaves. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe another archive. Maybe nothing at all. What I found was a woman, sitting beneath the silver-leafed tree, reading from a small, leather-bound book. Her hair was long and white, her eyes behind thick glasses, her dress a faded shade of lavender. "You came," she said without looking up. I froze. "You knew I would?" She nodded. "Of course. You've been walking this path longer than you think." I crossed the grass and sat beside her. The book trembled slightly in her hands. "Are you Marlene?" She smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she handed me the book. It was filled with names, handwritten. All the children, all the projects, all the handlers and doctors and defectors. It was a ledger, yes, but it read like a prayer. Each name was followed by a line in another language, one I didn't recognize. I traced a few with my fingers. "What does it say?" "Their truth," she said. As they spoke it, the first time they remembered. I swallowed hard. "Why here?" She looked around the garden. "Because healing isn't a room full of files. It's a space where memory is allowed to grow wild." I stayed for hours. We didn't talk much. Mostly I listened. To the wind through the branches, the soft creak of the tree, the breath of the woman who had once orchestrated an empire of forgetting, now reduced to a caretaker of names. When I left, she gave me a single silver leaf pressed between glass. "For your wall," she said. "Not as a trophy, as a reminder." I carried it home like it was fragile, though something in me knew it wasn't, knew it had survived too much to break now. Back in Geneva, I mounted it beside my window, beneath the candle. Above a note I had written years ago that simply read, "Begin again." And so I did. Not with a new archive, not with a new story, but with a garden of my own. I bought a small house outside the city, a place with crooked floors and stubborn doors and backyard just wild enough to hold memory. I planted spirals in the soil, flowers arranged in the patterns once used in programming scripts. Except now, they bloomed. Children came to visit. Not survivors. Not patients. Just kids. They painted. They sang. They played beneath a wind chime made from old keys. Sometimes they asked me what I did before this. I always said, I helped people remember. And when they asked what I do now, I help them grow. Juliet visited with her partner and brought jars of honey labeled in 4 languages. Zara came once a month, always with something new from the field. Map fragments, whispers of new vaults, sightings of old symbols in new places. I archived everything, but I stopped chasing. Because the point was never to finish. It was to keep beginning. One evening I received a message. No sender, no subject line. Just an image. A group of women standing around a fire holding hands. In the background, a mural painted on stone. My face, surrounded by spirals with one word beneath. Remembrance. I wept. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming ache of knowing that somewhere, people were remembering because I remembered, because I told the truth when it would have been easier to disappear, because I stayed. So here now, as I write the last page of this journey, I don't feel an ending. I feel a horizon, a place we walk toward together. My name is Callista Hargrove. I survived forgetting. I reclaimed memory, and I gave it back to the world. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.